I'm just waiting for people to jump on here. There's nobody on here yet. Or at least it says there isn't. If you're on here, feel free to let me know. I'm just waiting for people to get on here. I don't think there's anybody on here at the moment. At least it's not saying that there is. So if you're on here, let me know. If not, no worries. Oh, it looks like we're starting to get some people trickling in. Sorry, for some reason the page didn't update whenever I set it up yesterday. I don't know if I didn't click save or maybe I didn't pay attention after I clicked save. Maybe there was an error or something. But yeah, it wasn't updated for some reason. So I got one question to answer so far. Ed, if you're on here, go ahead and let me know, and I'll start answering your question. I just want to wait, give Ed a few minutes to get on here. If you're on here, feel free to ask a question. The only question I got right now is from Ed. I just want to make sure Ed's on here because I don't want to answer the question and then Ed jump on later and say, hey, I didn't get on till later or whatever. So just want to make sure he's on here before I start talking about that. So if you got questions, feel free to ask. Ed, if you're on here, let me know, and I'll answer your question. If not, I'll just wait for new questions to. And you can just let me know in the chat, Ed, if you're on here. Just say that I'm here. If not, no worries. If you're just jumping on the office hours, I'm just waiting for a question to be asked. I got a question from Ed, but I want to make sure Ed's on here before I answer. So, Ed, if you just jumped on, let me know that you're on here, and I'll start answering your question. If not, I'll wait for somebody else's question to come in. All right, if you're just jumping on the office hours, I'm just waiting for questions to be asked. So if you got a question, feel free to ask. If not, no worries. All right. So we got a question here from Ed D says, "Hi Q, can you talk about the stretch shortening cycle and how lag builds and releases in the downswing?" So basically with the stretch shortening cycle, you can think of it like a rubber band, right? So if I bring back a rubber band, it gets stretched out and then it's going to want to snap harder, right? So that's kind of like what's happening with your muscles, right? As your muscles kind of build up, they want to snap faster, right? So that's basically what the stretch shortening cycle is. That's why a faster backswing can lead to a faster downswing because you can get that stretch shortening cycle. Whereas if you kind of do like a pause or a really slow transition, you're not going to get as much as that of that stretch shortening cycle. So that's really what that is. Think about it like if you were going to jump up for a rebound in basketball, right? Would you go down here and just kind of sit here and then jump up and wait for the ball to go up, or do you try to time when the ball's going to be in reach, and then once you're able to do that, you go down and then you go up, right? That's the shortening cycle at work, because you're going to get more bounce because of that stretch shortening cycle than you are if you just kind of sit down here and then go up, right? So that's basically what that is. Now, how lag builds, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? So if I'm creating if I'm kind of if I'm going up to the top and I'm like this and I pause and then I bring it down, I'm not going to have as much speed. Whereas if I bring it in and then I create some lag in the downswing, I create that stretch shortening cycle and then I let it go. Right. So I'm going to get a little bit more speed if I do that. Now, there's pros and cons, to doing a pause and not. If you're a golfer that pauses, you may be doing that to make sure that the momentum of the club is going in a good direction, or taking the momentum of the club out of it. So that way you can get the club to work down, to get the club to work down better. If you're having more flow, you better have the momentum of the club going in the right direction to be able to get it to come down in the right place in the downswing. So for example, let's say I'm bringing this club back, right, and I have a fast backswing, but the momentum of the club, let's say that I have a shorter swing and my fast backswing gets the club kind of going across the line, right? Well, when I pull down on this club, right, I'm gonna have this club kind of steep, and then I'm either gonna stand up out of it to shallow it out, or I'm gonna continue to come down steep, right? It's gonna be hard to hit a good golf shot from there. Whereas if I get up to the top and I do a pause and I take the momentum out of the club, right, and I have the momentum in a good spot, right, I have no momentum, right, I can just kind of get the club to work in a better way in the downswing, then you're going to be able to make a better swing. And it's going to be a little bit slower than had you had the momentum working in the right direction, getting in the same position, you had the flow, but you got to kind of pick choose your demons a little bit. So basically that's how that works. We want to get the club kind of loading up in the backswing. We want it to continue to load up in the start of the downswing to this lead arm parallel position. That's where I'm going to have, that's typically when we look at the best players, that's where we're going to see the maximum lag position, meaning the angle between the lead arm and the shaft, that's where we're going to see it the smallest. It's either going to be lead arm parallel or maybe a little bit later with some players. But it's almost always around that lead arm parallel position. And then from there, that's when the club starts to release, and it's gradually releasing, right? Typically, when we get to hands in front of the trail thigh, that club's about parallel to the ground. Then when we get to impact, hands in front of the lead thigh, and then we have the club releasing out in front, right? And the release is where the club's basically splitting the forearms, right? So you can see I got this white grip on here. You can easily see where that club is splitting my forearms. So you can see how that's right in between my forearms. We want that to be happening out in front. Roughly about 45 degrees is where you're going to see that. So that's how we want to release the club. And that's talked about, creating lag is talked about in the top speed lag course, right? So creating this lag angle, and then the release is talked about in the straight line release course, all a part of the Top Speed Golf system. So if you want to go check that out, you can click the instruction tab at the top of the screen, Top Speed Golf system, click Top Speed Golf system from there, and then you'll see each piece of the Top Speed Golf system. You'll see the lag course, and you'll see the straight line release course. It goes on to say, if left arm parallel is where lag is maxed out and begins to be released at that point, won't the club be flipped because the angle will be lost by or shortly after impact? Well, we want the club to release, right? Imagine if you're here and you just have lag all the way, right? It's not going to be very fast, right? So the reason why we lag the club is so that we can release it, and we can release it faster, right? If you're at the top, let's say we don't hinge the club, we don't lag it at all. So what does lag even mean, right? What that really means is that the club head is trailing your hands, right? So at address, it's basically in front of your hands, right? And then as I bring this club back, it's getting more and more behind my hands, and then it gets more behind my hands as I start my downswing. That's ideally what we would have happen. So it's maximum lag, it's maximum behind my hands. This would be in front of my hands. So imagine if I go up to the top and my swing is like this, right? There's no hinge, so there's no lag, right? If I'm just hitting balls like this, that's not going to be very fast, right? So that's why we want to have lag, so that way we can release it, right? So we have maxing out that lag here. It's gradually starting to release. So you can see by this point, you can see how it's 90 degrees. It was less than 90 degrees here between my lead arm and the shaft. I bring it down a little bit. Now it's about 90 degrees. Now I get in front of my trail thigh. It's more than 90 degrees. Then it's releasing faster and faster as I get to the ball because the club is going faster, right? And then it's going to release out in front about 45 degrees, roughly. That's where we want to have it, right? So it's releasing. We want it to release out in front. There's some players that get that lag, right? But then it's releasing at the ball. There's lots of reasons why that can happen. But that's what we see in a lot of players. So you get the lag, and then we release it out in front is ideally what we want to do. I mean, what I would call flipping, it would be basically an early release. That's what I would define as flipping, right? So flipping would be what I just talked about, where we're here, and then we're kind of letting all that go. We're releasing it too early. It'd be just an early release. Now, my club's releasing only maybe about right there at the ball. That's what I would call like a flippy kind of release. We want that club. Technically it is flipping, right? It's releasing, right? But I would define a flip as basically an early release, right? For releasing it out in front, like the straight line release is called, right? Releasing that about 45 degrees out in front. And there's an acceptable window. There's an acceptable range. Clay and I, and some of the other instructors, we looked at all the major winners from the last 25 plus years, probably more than that. We might be even up to like 30 years now, probably not that far. Between 25 and 30 years, we've looked at all the major winners. And we also looked at like the all-time greats, that maybe haven't won a major in the last 25 years. So like, Ben Hogan, Jack Nicklaus, Gary Player, we looked at like the all-time great players as well. And what we found is that, there's some players that release at about 28 or so degrees out in front. And there's some players that release it 55 degrees out in front, but most of them are somewhere in between. So I'd say the acceptable range is going to be around like that 28, 27 degrees out in front to about 55 degrees out in front. That's typically what we see in the best players. The average was about 40, 41 degrees, right? What Clay talks about in the Top Speed Golf system is 45 degrees. He hadn't done the research, looking at all the best players to see what the average is and what a lot of the best players when they're playing their best and things like that. So he put 45 to start because that's just what it looks like when you look at the best players typically. But it's the average is about 40, 41 degrees with an acceptable range of 28 to 55 degrees. Martin Keimer, Louis Oosthuizen, they're around that 28 degree release point, right? 55 degrees, that's going to be like a Dustin Johnson. That perfectly average release of 40, 41 degrees, that's going to be like an Adam Scott or something like that, but where the average was. So that's really what you'd be looking at. Ed, let me know if I didn't quite answer your question. I felt like I did, but might be misinterpreting it a little bit. Oh, no problem, Ed. Don't worry about it. It was easy because you were the only post in there, so I didn't have to go through it. All right, cool. Yeah, let me know if you have any more questions, Ed. I'll be happy to answer any more questions. So Ed D says, I chunked a lob wedge from the fairway sun after a gorgeous drive, of course. Didn't hit behind the ball, but came in too steep. It was about a 90-yard or a 70-yard shot. Should I be using the bounce to guard against being too steep on these. I guess I'm a little confused by the question. You say you chunked it, but then you say you didn't hit behind the ball. Chunking it is hitting behind the ball. So I'm not sure how you can. I'm confused by the question. But from that distance, you're not going to be using the bounce because the speed's too. You're not going to be using the bounce to like prevent the club from digging because there's just too much speed, right? If it's a lower amount of speed, right, you can do that, right? Like a chip or a short pitch, right? You can, or if you have a lie where the ball's kind of sitting up, right? You can do that, but not typically like a 70-yard shot, like a tight lie, especially if the conditions are soft. You're not going to prevent that club from digging. So if you hit behind the ball, it's going to be a chunk, right? I would say you just need to get better at. Well, one, I would say using a lob wedge from 70 yards really isn't necessary. Um, Unless you just have a course where it's just really, really hard fairways, um, or not hard fairways, but really, really firm greens that you need to have that spin to keep it from, rolling off the green. But generally, a 56 degree is going to be a little bit easier to hit. It's going to be a little bit easier to control. A 70-yard lob wedge, that's just going to be typically a pretty high ball flight with less margin for error. So I would recommend using a lower lofted wedge. Typically, I don't use my lob wedge for more than 30 yards out unless I just need some extra spin or I need to hit it higher, like up over something. You're going to have more control and you're still going to get spin. You're still going to get plenty of spin from like a 56, 54 degree wedge. You're still going to get plenty of spin, not as much, but you're going to get plenty of spin. But it's going to be a lower ball flight, so it's going to be easier to control, and you're going to have more margin for error there because the leading edge on it isn't as sharp, and also you're not going to have to hit it as hard, right? So basically, the difference between blading a lob wedge, a 70-yard lob wedge, and hitting it perfectly, right? There's less of a margin there, whereas if you were to blade a 56 degree wedge or a 54 degree wedge, it's not going to hurt you as much because you don't have to hit it as hard, right? So because you would have to hit a lob wedge so hard because it has loft, if you blade that, it's just going to go way over, right? So I just don't recommend. I'm not a big fan of unless you just absolutely need the spin. But most people don't. I mean, honestly, if you make solid contact with the ball, the 54, 56 degree wedge, you're going to get plenty of spin. If you're not getting very much spin, it's most likely because you're just not hitting the ball solidly, right? You're hitting the ground behind the ball or whatever it might be. So Eddie, so what's the solution to keep going too deep? Digging. Well, you're not going to keep the club from digging. This is what I'm saying. If you watch a tour player hit a wedge shot, like a 70, 80, 100-yard wedge shot, they usually take pretty big divots, right? You're not going to prevent the club from digging. It's going to dig at that speed. Reason is because it has a sharp leading edge on it, right? So if I have a short shot like this, I can open up the face a little bit, expose the bounce. I can stand closer to the ball, so that way it's more of just kind of like the toe of the club getting into the ground, and I can basically hit the ground, and the club's not going to dig. Now, depending on the conditions, right? If you have really soft conditions, wet conditions, it's going to dig some. You're going to take some of the turf. But if you have firm, dry conditions, you can just bounce it right off there. But for that length of shot, the amount of speed that you're going to have to hit that shot with, it's going to be difficult not to take it because of just the amount of, because it just has more force, going into the ground, right? You're not the way that you're using the bounce in that situation is that the club is coming up out of the turf, right? So it's not something you're intentionally trying to do to use the bounce. In order to make what you think you're doing is you think that you're not using the bounce, but the reality is that you're chunking the ball. You're hitting behind the ball. So the way that you prevent that is to make ball first contact. So that's what I'd be working on is making ball first contact. So for a 70-yard wedge, here's kind of what my kind of shot would be. One, I would use a 54 degree. I like a lower ball flight with my wedges. You can use a 56 degree as well, somewhere in that range, 54 to 56 degree. I think is a really, really good club for that yardage because it's enough loft to get plenty of spin, right? But it's also low enough loft that you can control it better. When we have a high lofted wedge, it's more difficult to control. You have to hit it harder. You get more spin, a little bit more spin, but to me, it's better to have that control and plenty of spin. And sometimes you get too much spin, right? If you play on really soft greens, you get a lob wedge and you hit it up there, and if you're not de-lofting that and you're coming in and you don't have you're hitting it high and with a lot of spin, it may spin off on you, right? So I just like typically the only time I would use a high, super high lofted wedge, like a 58 degree or more, would be inside 30 yards where you need more spin, right? Because you're not hitting it as hard, you're not getting as much spin, right? So, but from a longer distance, you're hitting it hard enough to get spin, even if you use a 50 degree, you would be getting some spin, right? But I think somewhere between a 54 and a 56 is a good club to use for that yardage. So let's just assume that this is like my 54 degree. And what I'm going to do from 70 yards is I'm going to have a narrowish stance, right? Basically, I want to have a narrow stance so I can kind of lean forward and get my body forward. But also, I want to have a wide enough stance that I have stability. So I don't want to have my feet like this. I don't want to have my feet like this either. So generally, for that kind of shot, I'm going to be about like this. I'm going to play the ball middle to maybe just back of middle. I'm going to lean my body forward. I'm going to keep my body forward. I'm going to turn my chest back and turn my chest through, right? And I'm going to focus on making that good ball first contact, right? So that's really, really the technique. If, and that doesn't mean that you're going to be, you're never going to chunk it again. I chunk wedges sometimes. You watch tour players, they chunk wedges sometimes, right? So it's not like there's something that I can give you that's going to make you never, ever chunk a wedge again. Wedges are more likely to dig, so they're more susceptible to chunking, right? But we need to hit these shots, to be able to get the ball to stop on the green. Sure, you could hit an 8-iron from that distance. Now, if you have an opportunity to kind of roll the ball up there, play kind of link style, land it, a little more than halfway there and kind of like tumble it up there, that's going to be a higher percentage shot as far as not chunking it for sure, because you're not hitting it as hard. You're going to be if you're using an 8-iron, it doesn't have as sharp as a leading edge. It's going to come in. It's not going to want to dig as much into the ground, and you're going to be less likely to chunk it. So chunks are a big issue, and you have, an opportunity to just kind of roll it up there. You can certainly do that as well. But that's really what it comes down to. It's just making more solid contact. That's funny because that had been my choice using the 56. I just recently started hitting the 60. Yeah, I mean, to each their own on that. I mean, you could certainly hit a 60. I'm just saying you're going to have a higher percentage if you don't. We have to be a little bit careful copying exactly what tour players do. Now, a tour player would likely use a 60 degree from that distance, but there's a couple things to consider there. So one is that they're de-lofting their wedges probably more than any of us are, right? They're really de-lofting that. So they're taking that 60 degree down quite a bit. So that's part of it. Also, they're usually playing really firm greens where they need that spin. They're firm and fast, so they need that spin. Most of us just aren't playing greens like that are super firm and super fast. We can use a lower lofted club. It's gonna, like a 56 to a 54, and you're gonna be able to get plenty of spin and get it to stop. I've had to kind of change, what, if I go to a course that is like that, yeah, I might hit, it depends on the course that you're playing, right? So, but in most situations, most of us just aren't going to be playing courses where you really need to hit a 60 from 70 yards. Goes on to say, I need to replace my sandwich and lob wedge. Sounds like going to like a 53, a 58 might be a good way to go. My new gap wedge has 45 degrees of loft. Yeah, I mean, that's just something you would find like through a fitting. You know, what I carry a 58, a 54, and a 50. And then I have the power spec clubs from Ping. So it's basically just a little bit of a lower lofted iron. So my pitching wedge is like a degree or two lower lofted than what like a standard pitching wedge is. So that's why my wedges are a little bit lower. Um, but yeah, I mean that's pretty normal. You just want to have good gapping is all, is really what it comes down to. And the only way to really make sure of that is to go get professionally fitted. No problem, Ed. Glad to help. All right, we got about 15 minutes left. If anybody has any more questions, the reminder email didn't go out today, so may not be a ton of questions today, but no worries. All right, we got about 10 minutes left. If we have any more questions. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all next time.